Iyer. Hey, Sarah.
Hey.
Happy March. Happy March. And March, we are talking about endurance, resilience. And we have a great story from Pat today that's going to help us kick off March. The whole entire theme. We're going to have 5 weeks all together in March. So that's going to be itself is an endurance. So yes, so we're gonna have Sarah start us up because we are already 5 minutes late. So we're gonna get going. So hey, Sarah.
Okay. Hello, everyone. It's um, it's good to be back, and I'm happy to kick off this meeting, this conversation with my introduction. So, if you are new, I'm Sarah M. I grew up in Cambodia. I survived the horrific experience. I don't want to say it, but when the communist regime took over our country, they turned my life upside down. I I struggled so badly for 4 long years to survive, and I did. Thank God, I survived that ordeal, and I was able to escape from the captivity, and finally escape from the country. And I am so grateful that I am here in this country, meeting a lot of wonderful people that have love and compassion. So I rebuild my life as part of my resilience. It's contribute to this theme for this month. So yeah, that's my story, and I have my book written. It's called How I Survived the Killing Fields, and it's available on my website, sarahim.com.
And she did it less than 2 minutes. Woo!
Yeah, so back to you, Lee.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah. I think, yes, resilient is something that each and every one of us didn't know or didn't think we have. But lots of time, when tough time comes, we just flex that muscle. We just take it out and use it. And I think whatever it is, keep us going is how long can we endure and using that muscle. And we have many, 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 many stories that we are hoping to share with you this month. To start off with Sarah, I mean, her resiliency is just phenomenal. I mean, to run away from the Khmer Rouge in that jungle, you cannot do it without resilience. For me, my family came from Vietnam, and it's about the same time frame in 1979. And our resilience is the 4 years that we were with the communists. Whatever we need to do to survive, to get through that period, and then find a way to get out, even though that we knew that once we get into that boat, and that's why we were called boat people, because we escaped the country by boat, and we knew that whatever it takes, resilience is what we needed at the time. And my parents didn't hesitate because they know that their parents have done it from China to Vietnam. They can do it again, just for us. They look at their children and say that it's worth it. So and now the pandemic, I think we have many resilient stories that we need to keep telling on each other, so we can actually use it as a nutrition, use it as our vitamin, our food to carry us on. And my story and my book and my TEDx talk is on my website, leatran.com. If you are curious about, who I am and what resilient that I have, I invite you to visit my website. Today, we're going to hear Pat's story, Pat Iyer. I want to make sure that everybody know is Iyer. It's just funny because when we take a quick look, it's almost like an L, but it's an I. So easy mistake. But I'm going to ask Pat to introduce herself with her background. But today we're really looking forward to hear her story about her resiliency, how she rebuilt her business with her husband. So I'm giving you a little snippet, but Pat, welcome. Welcome
Thank you.
to
Thank
be
you.
here with us, and thank you for able to come and share your story with us. So to give us a little bit of a food of encouragement for going forward.
You know, I see as what we have in common is an immigrant background. My
Mm,
mother and her two brothers came over by boat from Ireland when they were in the midst of famine and great economic stress and landed in New York City in Ellis Island and had to be processed through that whole experience. My grandmother taught her children, who in turn taught the next generation, how to be resilient and how to be survivors, going from everything that they knew and giving up everything they knew to come to a new country.
mm-hmm.
I married a man from India who came in not on a boat, but on a plane when he was 21 in order to get his master's degree. And he also went through that experience of going from a totally different culture to landing in Washington State, where he grew up close to the equator, and he landed in September, and pretty soon it started turning into ice and snow. And he thought, what is this? He tells me that he tried walking on it. Well, if you've ever lived in a northern climate, you don't slide your feet on ice, you plant your feet. So the first day, boom, right on his backside.
Well, I had no idea. I've known Pat for I guess maybe a year, but I had no idea that you are me, your husband, come from the tropical either. So that's something new to me.
Yes.
It's wonderful. Yeah.
Mhm.
So he had a lot of endurance himself also. And how did you two met? How did you meet?
We met in the 1960s. In 1969, if you remember, the peace movement was going on, hippies were going on. I was a Quaker, and I was very committed to peaceful values and wanting the Vietnam War to end. In fact, I was in college when the Cambodian War was going on at the University of Pennsylvania. We met at a rally that was against a type of missile system, the anti-ballistic missile system. I went there with a guy, he went there with a girlfriend. We met as two couples, and then it turned out that he gave me and his girlfriend a ride home, and he dropped her off first, and then I stayed in the car, and before I had gotten out, he had gotten my phone number and started asking me to go out with him. And 5 weeks later, he asked me to marry him.
Wow. Oh, wow. What a story. It must be love at first sight.
It was something that swept me off my feet. I had
Mm.
been dating other boys. I had been engaged once officially and broke up with that boy before the wedding. And another boy I was engaged to, and I broke up with him when he was in Marine camp. But those were long relationships. I mean, it took me a year or more of a relationship with that guy to get to the point of being engaged. And then here was my husband, and that was 51 years ago that he asked me to marry him.
Congratulations. Oh, that's such a beautiful story. Oh my goodness. It just meant to be, I guess. Like it take that event in order to get you two to meet. And something inside you probably tell you, I mean, for 5 weeks. Oh my God. I'm dating the same guy for 5 years and we wait for another year to get married. And and I know in the beginning that we're gonna have a long-term relationship, but 5 weeks. Wow.
Wow,
Yeah.
I'm get in the middle. I was dating for about 5 months. So between weeks and years and
5 is the lucky number.
Yeah, 5 weeks, 5 months, and 5 years. All right. So how can yeah, tell us, after that, I mean, what happened?
Well, my husband worked as an employee for several years, and then he got into a power struggle with his boss, and his boss saw him as a threat and fired him. While I was in graduate school, I had just started my master's degree in nursing at University of Pennsylvania, where I got my undergraduate and graduate degrees. And we looked at each other and said, well, I've already started graduate school. Should I stop and get a job? Because you don't have a job. But we had $25,000 in the bank, which in 1978 was enough money to get us through a year.
Mm-hmm.
We had no income the entire time that I was in graduate school, absolutely zero. Part of my work at Penn was with pregnant diabetics, and I got invited to give a talk in Beverly Hills when I finished my master's program, and I literally had no money at all to pay for the hotel or buy a plane ticket or pay for food. And I just started a job in May, and this conference was in June of 1979. So one of my professors said to me, well, go ask the dean of the School of Nursing if she'll give you some money. And I thought that was an astounding request, because there was this woman, she was up in a pedestal in my mind. I will go and beg her for money. She said, well, you could go out and when you go and talk to her, you could say, when you go to California to give your talk, you can call people in California and Beverly Hills and talk up the nursing program. I thought, well, I have nothing to lose. My boss at my new job said, I'll give you the time off, but I'm not going to advance you any money. You just started 3 weeks ago. So I went and talked to the dean, whose name was Claire Fagan, very well known in the nursing world. And it felt like I was walking across a football field to get to her desk. I was so in awe of this woman. And I told her what I was looking for, and she started smiling. And I said, I could talk up how Penn was my program, and I did this research there, and I'll keep track of who I'm speaking to, and I'll prepare a report. And she said, well, I think your employer really ought to fund your trip. And I said, well, they said they give me the time off, but they wouldn't give me anything to pay for my hotel room. So she smiled at me and she said, sure, I'll do that. So she gave me a list of names of people. I called guidance counselors. I called some alumni. I made 15 or 20 phone calls, and I wrote up a report, and I got a check for $435, which paid for my hotel room, my flight, my airfare, my food. It was enough. And what I learned in that was, it's okay to take a risk, because the worst that can happen is she could have said no to me. And instead, I got rewarded for being bold, and she admired my courage and gave me the money that I needed in order to pay for that trip.
It's the power of ask.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and I have learned a long way in order to get to where, once sometimes you just have to ask, because you don't ask, the answer is always no.
Correct. 100% of the time.
So, wow, that's quite a story. But I want to backtrack a little bit. Did you ever even thinking about moving back to India with your husband to stay there if things didn't work out, or is there any family like demand or anything? It's like I'm still at all with the racial marriage after 5 weeks. That's a lot to iron out.
Yes, and the marriages are at that time were almost totally arranged marriages.
Mm-hmm.
And his family was trying to find women for him while we were dating. He knew that his family, who was very conservative, would not necessarily welcome a white girl into the household with open arms. Non-Brahmin, non-Hindu, different color, different
Yeah.
country. We sent them a telegram that they got 4 hours before our wedding ceremony, telling them that we were getting married. They had no idea I existed until that time.
Wow.
Oh,
He knew what they would say to him.
You
And
have a book on that?
so, and I did get married in a sari. He wore a suit,
Uh-huh.
I wore a sari.
Wow.
We got married in a Quaker ceremony. It
Wow.
was something that was comfortable for both of us. And then 2 years later, we went to India to meet his family. They talked about me constantly in a language that I didn't understand. I'd be sitting at the table and I'd look up and there'd be a silence. And I'd look at my husband and he'd say, "Oh, they're just looking at your watch," or "They're talking about the color of your hair." And I thought, "Oh, this is really comfortable. Thank you." But no, we never seriously considered living in India. My husband left India because he was entrepreneurial. He
Yeah.
liked the idea that you could come to the United States
Right.
and make your own destiny
Yeah.
and start a company, which is ultimately what he did after I finished my master's program. We then decided that he would get back at his boss. This was the grand plan. He was going to get back at his boss by starting a company and competing with his boss. That was the way he wanted to get revenge. So the revenge involved, and here's a really key phrase, signing a personal guarantee. We borrowed $1 million so that he could start a company. And the personal guarantee part, for those of you who are watching this who don't know that phrase, means that if you don't pay back your loans, everything that you own can be taken to satisfy the loan. That's really chilling. We had a house, we had a 2-year-old at that point. When his company defaulted after 3 years, he started it in 1980. 1980 had interest rates of 27%.
Remember that.
Right.
Crazy.
And there was no way that my husband could ever make enough money in that company to pay back those loans. But we didn't know it at the time. We were hopeful and idealistic, and he was filled with this vengeance. So after 2.5, 3 years, when his company failed, then we were faced with the possibility of bankruptcy because we had signed that personal guarantee. And I was pregnant with our second child when the man came from the Small Business Administration, walked around our house trying to decide if the bank would take it. In the meantime, my husband saying, "Hey, you see the crack in the wall? See the stain on the ceiling? See the crack in the foundation?" Trying to keep the value of the house down. And this man looked at me, and I'm 6 months pregnant at the time, and maybe he took some pity on us, but they decided that my husband would be allowed to negotiate so that he could sell the building, sell the welding equipment, and if he could give them 10 cents on the dollar that he had borrowed, then they would not force us to go into bankruptcy. It was close.
That was some negotiation skill that you and your husband had there. I have to admit. I don't know if you can talk bang away from things, but wow. Wow.
Well, I give him the credit for the negotiation. What I did was show my pregnant belly. That was the extent of what I
That's
did.
enough, right?
Yeah.
So what happened afterward? Were you able to, I mean, how did you rebuild back? How did you get the money to pay back?
He's by selling the equipment and the building, he satisfied the loans, and he was a sales rep. So what he discovered was he didn't have to do the welding part of the business. What he needed to do was to be able to be the middleman and sell the machine parts to the end user. And he marked them up in the process, and he could do that in the living room.
Hmm.
I watched that process, and I used to see that he worked all the time, and I remember saying, "You're just a workaholic. You're working 7 days a week." Well, then I started my own business, and I suddenly realized, "Hey, Pat, you're working 7 days a week. Maybe you shouldn't be so free to call somebody a workaholic." By the time I started my company, I had co-authored a book on nursing, which enabled me to approach attorneys to say, I'm an expert witness and I'm interested in testifying about nursing malpractice cases, that attorneys flocked to me because nurses were in demand. The type of nursing background I had was in demand as a medical surgical nurse. And then I started supplying other expert witnesses to attorneys and built up a very successful business, which I was able to sell after 28 years.
Wow.
So we literally went from no money in the bank to becoming very comfortable because of the combination of my husband's skills. He started getting involved in the stock market. He does options. He's got a lot of experience with those. And I have continued to generate income even after I sold my company 6 years ago.
Wow.
I think that's a brilliant way to approach what you're doing, Pat. Having that nursing skill and knowing that you can approach attorney to do testifying stuff. Not too many nurses want to be out there to do testifying, and that's a field that you can work with attorney and also guiding other nurses. That is just so unique way of showing your skill as a nurse in the legal systems and backing people who've been either malpractice or lots of patients out there die a preventable death. I suppose my dad was one of them, and
Mhm.
I really tip my hat off to you to give people the opportunity to tell their side of the story, because a lot of time patient don't win, doctor wins, big hospital wins, institutional people win because they have the power of money, they can hire people, and patient, we just so chaotic in our own miserable way of dealing with our with our loved ones, the people who get sick, and we have not a mindset of a clear way to think what is our right or what is something that done wrong.
Mhm.
So I want to say that, yeah, that's a great way to go. So that is who Pat is, by the way. Yes. So what do you do now?
Well, now I coach other nurses who are building their legal nurse consulting businesses. That's part of what I do. The other part is that I've always enjoyed writing. That first nursing book in 1986 has led to another 48 books that I've either written or I've been one of editors with other people who've written the chapters in my books. And I found that I enjoy coaching people who want to write their own books, or they've written their book, they know they need to have a professional editor. I provide that service. Or the third piece is some people don't have the time or the skill to write their own book, but they've got a story to tell. Then they hire me as a ghostwriter to create
Mm.
that book for them.
Wow. You
And
are
that's
so proud.
primarily in the nonfiction business realm and medical realm is where I specialize.
Mm, wow. So, do you have a need to use your nursing background at all during
Well,
this
I think I
time?
use it whenever I am talking with the people I'm coaching. I also started getting back into legal nurse consulting in February when one of my favorite clients called me about a big case. And now I've put in 43 hours on this case since the beginning of February. I do find, to your point, Leah, that the legal system has made healthcare safer because there are consequences when hospitals or doctors make errors and they have to pay large amounts of money. They have
Mhm.
a high incentive to try to avoid that ever happening again. So some of the issues that used to occur have been corrected.
Mhm.
There are unfortunately still big holes in the safety net in healthcare that people can fall through because of communication problems.
Yeah, my case was my dad was back in 1987. So I don't know how the legal system, I mean, I know that lots of nurses were understaffed, lots of department were understaffed, nurses didn't have enough uh, tools and equipments to man how many patients in a certain ward, and communication was not good. And there are certain things that happened to my family which I do not have it happen to any other families. And I was so young, I couldn't speak up, and my mom didn't want to. But there was a legitimate case because one of the doctor who tended my father actually approached me and asked me if I want to make a case because she will stand next to me, because that's how I know that something we have a base, but we didn't. And then we talk about it. And at the time, it was just like, if it's not worth it to go through. But it's been 30 some years, and I don't, I just really think that I don't know. Do you represent patients or somebody who have a wrongful case that they're not a nurse or a doctor, but a patient that want to write a story? Not me. I don't want to go back there. It's too painful. But in case somebody who has something like that, and do you help them write the story out, or do you guide them or a certain way for somebody who's fresh? I mean, I'm sure that the hospital take very good care of a lot of patients, but like you say, there's also a lot of loopholes and a lot of things that not oversight that people needs to know to prevent it, because a lot of time we don't speak out, then things just going to be swept under the rug. So
Legal nurse consultants can work with patients once they have retained an attorney, but we can't offer opinions
I see.
without that family having an attorney, because that will be considered the practice of law, the
Right. That's
unauthorized
true.
practice of law.
Yeah.
It is a long road. It takes between 3 to 5 years, and that's when trials are taking place.
Yeah.
Right now, trials are starting virtually,
Mm.
but there's going to be a huge backlog in cases because the people who have criminal charges against them are entitled under the Constitution to a speedy trial. So they are in front of all of the civil cases.
Yeah.
And families often have to relive over and over again the negative things that happened to them as a result of this incident. So there is a price that families pay. There's also a price that healthcare providers pay, because they have to relive the whole experience over and over again. Nobody does this lightly.
Mm-hmm.
However, the only way that families can be compensated after somebody has died is through money. When somebody's been catastrophically injured, the only way that people can get the medical care that they need, like brain damaged parents or brain damaged children,
Right.
or people who are paralyzed or severely burned, they require extraordinary amounts of medical care that's costly, which is something that we don't do well in the United States. We don't handle the catastrophic injury expenses particularly well.
Yeah.
So the compensation from a lawsuit can make the difference in a person having a good quality of life and surviving or dying because there isn't enough resources to be able to pay for their care. So there's so many nuances of this.
Yeah. It is true. This is like open a whole new cans of worm. There's so many things to talk about in our healthcare system, but I think your resiliency about fighting back from being almost, I guess, bankrupt to be able to rebuild your life, that's pretty awesome. And yeah, so I know that there's so much more questions, so many more questions I could ask, but I'm going to ask if Sarah have any question for you.
Yeah,
And
I would like to know if you have any recommendation for people who like to start a business. How do they need? What do they need to do to protect themselves from the same situation that you've been through?
Well, I don't recommend a personal guarantee based on what we went through. I recommend having a lot of savings so that you have a backup cushion. Nobody well, I shouldn't say nobody, but very few people start a business and they're immediately successful. There are some industries, especially in the last year, who have done extraordinarily well. And there are other companies, as somebody said to me recently, the pandemic cleansed the weaker businesses. And
Mm,
it sounds cold-hearted, but that is indeed what has happened.
mm,
I would suggest having as much savings as possible, talking to your family about your desire to be involved in starting a business, making sure that they are supportive because they can act as an anchor.
Mm,
Or if you've got negative people in your family who will say, well, Sarah, you're never going to be successful. Why do you think that you can do something like that? You would be better off with a paycheck. What are you thinking, girl?
mm,
I mean, if you live with somebody like that or somebody influential in your family is giving those messages, that can be extremely destructive.
mm,
Your family has to support the idea of it, be willing to sacrifice, to be able to know that if Sarah's got something that she's got to do tonight, maybe somebody else needs to make dinner. Maybe somebody else needs to pick the child up at the soccer practice. It is a family commitment when one person starts a business. And if it's not, then it's hard. It really is hard. I was fortunate that my husband was entrepreneurial and supported me when I put together my first desk, which was 2 filing cabinets and a board. That was my desk when I started my business. And I grew to a 3,600 square foot office condo for my company, which was the one that I sold 6 years ago. I would say also try to keep the long view. It's easy to get discouraged. If you have a commitment to be an entrepreneur, that burning desire stays in you and it helps you get through hard times, discouraging times, times when you need to change your course, times when you need to talk to other people and say, hey, Lea, I'm encountering this problem. What do you think I should do? This is not a venture that you can do totally alone. Other people can share their knowledge with you. So don't borrow a lot of money, have a lot of savings, make sure that your family is supportive, and get support from other people who are further ahead on the road than you are.
wow, that's
I think it's
why.
just so true, though. I mean, starting a business is hard in any environment, let alone the catastrophic environment, right?
Yeah,
But like World War II, or like, when we have a crash in 2008, anytime that a big catastrophic things is the time, either opportunity, like you say, it's time to sweep out the weak one. And tenacity and resiliency is what make you stay in the game. um, just have to just keep focus on one day at a time, and like you said, have a vision, and have a long vision, knowing that slow step will get you there. And I know that a lot of small business right now are struggling because we are grappling with the idea of how are we going to do things differently now that we are still basically staying home. But look, we're having an interview and seeing each other online and broadcast it to who knows how many people are watching this, right? So that's an innovation that we need to tap on and be resilient about. Keep on trying. We don't know what's going to stick, but if we don't try, it's not going to stick.
right.
You're absolutely right.
So I want to thank you so much for sharing your story, your resilience with us. Sarah, do you have any more questions for Pat before we go?
No more question for now. Yeah.
Okay. Well, both of us want to really thank you for helping us open up March with your incredible story. And I still want to talk to you about the interracial marriage within that 5 weeks. I am like full of question marks, but that's what makes it fun, because I love extraordinary story. How do you overcome all those roadblocks? to get to a 51 years of marriage. That is not something anyone should take lightly. And there must be a secret recipe, or there's got to be something that fire that fuel that it just keep going on, right? So I'm really intrigued. Maybe we have to get you back for a love theme. No, we just done the love theme. Um, I don't know what other theme. I'll find a theme. I'll invite you back.
Oh, that sounds great. And if I can help any of your listeners, my website is patiyer.com, Patiyer.com. If you need help with a book or an editor
Yes.
or a ghostwriter, or just want to chat about an idea for a book, please keep me in mind.
Well, thank you for telling us that, because yes, this woman is a wealth of knowledge and information. So I would invite you to tap on her, to get acquainted with her, to connect with her. And 48 books and still going. So definitely somebody you want to know and you want to be in your circle. So thank you so much, Pat. And
Thank you. I appreciate the chance to chat, and wish you both a successful rest of the evening.
well, thank you.